show.
Welcome to episode 137 of the Gluttons For Punishment Podcast, or GFP, a Toronto Maple Leafs and NHL podcast hosted by Michael Lepore and Anthony Bruno. He's Lepore, I'm Bruno. Thank you so much for listening and watching us on YouTube as well. The Toronto Maple Leafs are chugging along. We are getting closer and closer to the start of the Stanley Cup playoffs. At the time of recording, the Leafs are still sitting in third place in the Atlantic Division, and they are coming off a very disappointing loss at home to the Carolina Hurricanes. They blew a 3-0 lead, a 4-2 lead, lost in a shootout. It was a pretty demoralizing loss. I get it. Carolina's good, but now they've lost to Boston a couple times. They lost to Carolina. They're having some trouble against some pretty good teams. So we're going to give you our thoughts and opinions on everything going on with the Leafs right now. And we'll see what else comes up. Because if you know me and Lepore, there's always some juicy topics that come along with the GFP podcast. So before we get into all that, it is time to officially welcome in my partner in crime, Mr. Michael Lepore. How you doing today, man?
Anthony Bruno, you know the phrase, as always, happy to be here. Kind of cool. I've cooled down a bit. It's not too often during the regular season that I get all heated and angry and lose sleep over a Leafs loss. But that Carolina game had a little bit of everything. So I found myself a little tingly after the game and had a hard time putting my head to the pillow. Just rattled. But here we are to talk about it. It's my vent session. I'm very grateful for it. So let's get right at it, buddy.
Yeah, let's dig right into it because I love what you just said there about how rattled you were, because it was the same with me. Like throughout the season, there are losses and there are some bad losses. And, you know, maybe in the past I used to get a little more upset. But, you know, over the last number of years, I've just been like, whatever. It was a shitty loss. But, you know, this team, it almost doesn't matter what they do until the playoffs, right? I know that's kind of like the easy way out and the easy way to think about it, but that loss against Carolina really pissed me off. Like I was swearing, and I don't think I was alone because you felt the same way. I'm sure a lot of people from Leafs Nation felt the same way. And again, you could probably spin it as whatever, nothing matters until the playoffs. But I think back to the two losses against Boston. Now this loss to Carolina, like if you just go through their recent schedule, they also lost 6-2 to Vegas. Now, that was coming off back-to-back wins against Vegas and Colorado, but they've been losing to some pretty good teams here recently. And the question I want to ask you, like, is this indicative of what we are going to see in the playoffs? Because sure, you can beat up on some bad teams, on some middle-of-the-road teams, but when you're locked up in a 7-game series against either Boston or Florida, I think there's a little bit of cause for concern here, seeing how they haven't really handled business against these good teams. So what's your take on what we've seen from the Leafs here recently?
If someone asked me if I was concerned about it or if I had this fear in me from how this team's looked against good teams and how it'll correlate into the playoffs, I can't say it's really there because we all know it doesn't matter. Things are going to change as we get closer to the playoffs and as we get into the playoffs. And I'd like to see their overall record against, say, teams over 500 or playoff teams or however you want to do it. Maybe you can pull it up, Mr. Stats Guru Anthony Bruno. But flip it around. Like when someone asks you a question like that, I want to say, well, if they had a good record against those teams, like what would their record be? You know what I mean? Like they'd have the President's Trophy if they had a good record against playoff teams. So the record's their record. Their point space is their point space. I think they're still at like 105, 106 point pace. I don't dig too much into it. One thing I will say, and he's always a hot topic in Leafland, is you really saw it in that Carolina game. Mitch Marner is important to this team. He's
so damn important to this
He's really
team,
important
man.
to this team. And we've talked about the games without Morgan Riley, and you've pulled up the numbers of their unbelievable record without Morgan Riley. And I think the Leafs, I don't know how many years it went back. Someone posted it. Without Marner in the lineup, they're a little over 500. And it wasn't a small sample size. Like there was 10, 15 games, or maybe even 20 games. And they're essentially a 500 team without Marner. And you think about the impact that he can have on a game through his 5-on-5 play, and then it spills into him not having him on the power play. And in this Carolina game, the penalty kill. Leafs up by 1 with 30 seconds to go. Marner's on the ice, not Nylander. Even the 6-on-4, Marner's probably on the ice. So he's an important player, man. And I know I don't want to call him controversial in Leafland. He causes a lot of discussion, and with his contract being able to be negotiated this summer, it's going to cause even more. And some people are going to get heated about it. And I don't even want to predict what's going to happen with that deal. But we need Mitch. We need Mitch in the lineup if we're going to be successful. Even the power play, everyone's pointing to how bad the power play has been recently. I'm quick to look at what it was before this downward spiral. And they posted it during the game. They were batting 50% in February. It's like, well, it was going to regress. They were going to hit a cold point, and this is a really cold point. But not having Marner on the power play feels different. It feels different because when you watch Matthews, Marner, Nylander, Tavares, and Riley on the ice together, what's always incredible to me is, and it's for someone who plays hockey, how patient and calm they are all the time. Like every team has like the handful of guys who have talent, and they're snapping it around and they're doing good things and they're creating chances. But I just find with those 5, even if like a big scoring chance is not created, it's just calm. It's just calm. They never panic. Those little things like drop the shoulder to get the guy to bite, then you just dish it off. It's impressive. And no one can just replace Marner. So the power play is different without him.
I would argue that Mitch Marner is the heart and soul of the Leafs power play.
Whoa.
Like, if you think about it, right, the power play runs through Mitch Marner. It doesn't run through Morgan Riley or whoever else is at the point. I know at times Timothy Liljegren has been on the first power play unit, but it doesn't run through Matthews. It doesn't run through Nylander. It doesn't run through John Tavares or whoever the net front guy is. It really does run through Mitch Marner and his play on the half wall. And, his ability to constantly find guys in great positions to shoot, whether it's John Tavares in the slot, cross-iced Austin Matthews. Like, he's always finding openings. He's always finding the right guy on the power play to distribute the puck to. I know a lot of people would say Mitch Marner needs to shoot more himself. Yeah. And the play that he got injured on, it wasn't a power play, but he had a wide open net and then kind of went around the net and, jammed up his ankle. That's a whole different story altogether. But listen, Mitch Marner, he's allowed to do stuff like that. He's allowed to do things that, you say, what the fuck, what's going on here? Because he's one of a handful of guys in the NHL who can actually like pull off the impossible at times. But anyway, going back to your point about even the penalty kill, he's so important to the penalty kill. We know how important he is to the power play. We know how important he is just to the offense in general. So not having him here for the last number of games, it's been noticeable. And sure, it's not noticeable against Philadelphia when they go in there and they beat, I don't want to say Philly's a bad team because they're technically in a playoff spot, which is kind of a miracle, but they're not a good team. That's not a serious team. You don't really need Mitch Marner in games like that. But when you're playing Boston, when you're playing Carolina, when you're playing good quality opponents and you don't have that guy in the lineup, man, it's very telling. And looking at the stats, you were right. The Leafs all time without Marner in the lineup, 15, 13, and 5. It's not good. When Matthews isn't in the lineup, they got a pretty darn good record. When Morgan Riley's not in the lineup, this team has like a otherworldly record, which is insane. So yeah, that's been rough, man, not having Mitch in the lineup. And I hope that when he does come back from this ankle sprain, that he's able to hit the ground running, because we were getting so close to the playoffs here. And if he's not healthy, this team's not winning shit in the playoffs. As much as people want to chirp this guy and as much as he's been the whipping boy in the past for this hockey team, this team is not winning a single thing without this guy healthy in the lineup.
Are you worried? Are you worried it's something serious and you could be a long-term?
I don't know. Maybe I think about this injury in football, like when you hear the high ankle sprain.
Yeah, even
when it comes to football players, you're like, man, oh man, that's like a 4 to 6 week injury. And I get it. It's a little bit different in hockey. I'm a little bit worried, man, because he's durable. Like, think about it. He has not missed that many games in his 8-year career. he is one of the most durable guys on this team. And I would like to think they're playing it safe with him and they don't want to rush him back because they understand that they're kind of locked into this 3 seed here and they're going to, play Boston or Florida in the first round. But if he's not 100%, this team has absolutely no chance of winning a playoff series.
Was the decision not made the day of the Carolina game, whether he was going to play or not? And that kind of gave us optimism, thinking, okay, it's day to day, but I haven't heard anything since.
Yeah, I haven't heard an update, and maybe by the time we post this, there will be a Mitch Marner update on the status of his high ankle sprain. Or I mean, Darren Dreger reported as like a mid high ankle sprain.
Let's get specific.
So yeah, that's a little bit concerning. And Austin Matthews, he slowed down. He has 3 goals in his last 10 games. He's now scoring at under a 70-goal pace. So that's going to factor as well. I mean, before that, the previous 10 games, the guy was on an absolute tear. And then when your best player only scores 3 goals in 10 games, that's going to kind of affect things too. Again, especially when you're playing good quality opponents. It's time for a quick break to let you know that this episode is brought to you by the spring cleaning champions, Manscaped. This season, make sure you groom your carpets and your drapes with the leaders in below-the-waist grooming. Clear out that winter bush with Manscaped's Lawnmower 5.0 and watch your confidence bloom like the springtime flowers. So join the 10 million men worldwide who trust Manscaped by using our exclusive code GFP20 for 20% off and free shipping at manscaped.com. Lepore, the fellas, they need to clean up for springtime.
They certainly do, Anthony Bruno. So everyone, vacuum your carpets, mop your floors, clean your bathrooms and your kitchens, but most importantly, take care of those balls so they're shiny and silky smooth. Head over to manscaped.com, GFP20 for 20% off and free shipping.
Manscaped has everything you need to look good, feel good, and play good. So use our exclusive code GFP20 for 20% off and free shipping at manscaped.com. So do it right now. Go to manscaped.com and use our exclusive code GFP20 for 20% off and free shipping. I promise you won't be disappointed. It's time for an important message from BetterHelp, a sponsor of today's episode. Sometimes in life, we go through difficult times, whether that's personally, whether that's in a relationship, and your mental health cannot be ignored. And a lot of times, you can't tackle these situations by yourself. You need help. And that's where BetterHelp comes in. They make therapy easier and much less intimidating for a lot of people. BetterHelp lets you have therapy sessions as a phone call, video chat, or even messaging, whatever is most comfortable for you. BetterHelp will connect you with one of 30,000 therapists in their network. And in most cases, you'll be connected with a therapist within 48 hours. So go to betterhelp.com/GFP for 10% off your first month of therapy. Lepore, this service is incredible.
It is incredible, Anthony Bruno. Mental health is something that's very serious. And be aware, if you're going through a dark time, you do not have to try to beat this thing alone. There are services out there that can provide you with some great help. BetterHelp is number one when it comes to that. As Bruno mentioned, there are different ways you can get in touch with people, different ways you can contact people. It's all up to you. Go to betterhelp.com/GFP.
Join 4 million people who have used BetterHelp to live healthier and happier lives. So go to betterhelp.com/GFP for 10% off your first month of therapy to connect with a therapist and see if BetterHelp is right for you.
So that good quality opponent we played the other night, the Carolina Hurricanes, you mentioned getting angry. I'll let you go first. What made you the most angry from that game?
Well, obviously the shit show at the end, allowing 2 goals in the final 90 seconds, which was just completely unacceptable. I will say this, that game was entertaining as hell. That was one of the more entertaining games of like the last month, I would say.
Yeah.
Like back and forth, chances, like Samsonov made some big saves. But again, the thing, and it sounds simple to say, but the thing that pissed me off the most was just their inability to close out the game, because we've seen it so many times. And they had a 3-0 lead, 4-2 lead with about 90 seconds left, and they shit the bed. So that's what pissed me off the most.
Yeah, I'm actually not that bothered by blowing the late 2-goal lead. Number one, Carolina got a 6-on-4. And we say all the time on the show, we hate to talk about the refs. That call was pathetic on Conf.
Yeah, that was a bad call.
Like, oh my God. And you just knew too, as soon as they got the call, wow, it's gonna be a 6-on-4. Here we go. Right. And of course they score. And then that last one, I forget who tied it, but that was a hell of a tip. Like coming across the net, just flicked it,
Yeah, I
just
think
the
it was
amount.
Aho.
Was it? It sounds right. One of the best names in the National Hockey League, by the way. So just going by the net, just perfectly tips it into the corner. To me, the killer, the killer was the goal at the end of the second period to make it 3-2. I said out loud when that went in, I was watching it with my brother-in-law. I'm like, well, we're going into overtime now. And he kind of looks at me, he's not the biggest hockey fan. I'm like, no, it's hockey god stuff. They got this late goal right to finish second period. Now we got a war in the third. And this team's been really bad on the penalty kill. And to not be able to dial in that moment, just to finish out a period to make sure you're up by 2 goals going into the third, use the right word, Bruno. It's unacceptable. As for the game itself, it was exciting as hell, but I don't think it was a good game. How many breakaways did we get? Like that's not a good
Yeah, from
sign.
like a pure like hockey standpoint where like things were buttoned up. No, but I'm just
No,
talking about
coach's
from a pure
nightmare.
entertainment standpoint. I thought it was fantastic.
Yeah. I don't know. And then again, the power play. I already touched on how not having Marner really hurt us and how you mentioned how important you think it is to the power play. But would they go 0 for 4? Sucks, man. One power play wins it, and then they got the power play in overtime. Just couldn't close it out. And the way the game went, you just knew going into the shootout they weren't going to get that extra point. Just the way it is, because we've seen enough hockey games in our life. Just rattling, man, rattling. The late goals, the bullshit call on Conf, not being able to score on the power play, seeing our penalty kill not be able to get it done. It's not going to be good enough. And the stat that's going everywhere is the Leafs penalty kill versus other playoff teams, like compared to other playoff
Oh yeah,
teams.
the Leafs penalty kill is horrible.
Yeah. But
It's horrible.
you see it, and like they list them the best penalty kills, and they're mostly playoff teams. And then the Leafs are, of course, a playoff team, but they're in the bottom third of the league. I think they're literally the only one, if I
Yeah,
remember
Leafs are
correctly. That's up
24th in the NHL in penalty kill percentage.
fucking bad. What's their percentage?
76.8%.
76, and that's that low. Okay.
Yeah, like the best teams are in the 80s. They're all in the
Yeah.
80s, some in the mid 80s.
Isn't LA something stupid? They're like,
Yeah,
I
I'd
think
have
it
to
was,
pull up who's actually leading the league in penalty kill. But you know what? Like, surprisingly, the Jets have a bad penalty kill. And you would think, whoa, the Jets with
whoa.
Connor Hellebuck and just the system that they play, they actually have one of the worst penalty kills among playoff teams as well. I'll
Yeah.
just sort it right now. Yeah, the Kings are first at 86.4%.
Mm, yeah.
Carolina is second, 85.8. Flyers 84.7. Calgary and New York round out the top five, but the Jets, they're 21st in penalty kill, 78%. The Canucks are 20th in penalty kill. So, really, among playoff teams, the only team in a playoff spot right now with a worse penalty kill than the Leafs is Nashville. And they're almost in like a dead heat. They're at 76.3. So that's got to get cleaned up. Like I would like to go look at some stats about teams that have either made it to the cup final or won the cup. There's just no chance that they finished in like the bottom third in penalty kill percentage in the regular season, right?
I think I actually saw someone point out Florida had like one of the worst penalty kills in the league last year.
Oh shit, there you go.
Yeah, we'd have to look it up. I don't know if it was an actual account or someone just commenting, but I did see that somewhere. That like they were saying, "Oh, are you worried about this?" And someone said Florida was a joke on the penalty kill last year, and whether they were right or not, I don't know.
But then I guess when Bobrovsky plays out of his mind in the
Fair enough.
playoffs, all
Yeah,
those numbers go out the window.
yeah. And the thing is, it's not even just. I mean, a lot of power play goals for and goals against are just good luck or bad luck. It's not even the case. It's on the numbers there. Expected goals against per 60, 4-on-5. Again, worst third in the league. So it stacks up to the actual goals that are getting scored. It's not good. And it's something so fundamental. I want to say killing penalties, and something the Leafs have been pretty good at for the last few years. it's disappointing. And like, again, that position, how can you not tighten up for the last 10 seconds? Do what it takes, or is it the opposite? Your nerves kick in and you're gripping your stick too tight. I don't know, but just such a fucking piss off of a goal to let in.
Yeah, and it just sucks that they're beating a really good team. Like a team that's considered by many to be a Stanley Cup contender, the Carolina Hurricanes. You're up 3-0, then you're up 4-2, and it's like, you know what? This is a really good hockey game from the Leafs here. Now, again, like there were some blunders here and there, especially in the third period. It was kind of, back and forth. But you're like, man, this is going to be a really nice win. Samsonov continuing his great play. And I know, he technically let in 4 goals, but I still think he played pretty well in that game.
Like, oh yeah, he did.
And he's been really good recently, which is obviously amazing to see. But the other thing, like even just looking at the defensive numbers, like the Leafs, 21st in the league in 5-on-5 expected goals against per 60. Like the penalty kill, the 5-on-5 defensive numbers are just not good. Even like, again, I know Samsonov is playing well, but on the season, Leafs are 17th in the league in 5-on-5 save percentage. There's some things defensively that I don't love about this team, and that's why I'm still not convinced that they're actually going to do anything in the playoffs. And, we hear it all the time. Regular season means jack shit. Wait until the playoffs start. It's a whole new season, but I'm just not very impressed with what I'm seeing. Again, eye test numbers, the offensive numbers are there. That's fine. But again, every time they play these good teams, now it wasn't the case against Carolina, because they were actually able to generate offense, and Carolina was making like some very uncharacteristic, like just stupid plays in that game. But I'm worried that the offense is going to dry up again when it matters most. And I think people are getting spooked now. Like the power plays dropped off. Matthews is slowing down. Things are just not chugging along like they were. But again, you can then spin it the other way and say, hey, since January 18th, the Leafs had the 3rd best record in the league. 17-6-1 over their last 24 games. So there's different ways you can dice this up, but I'm still not overly convinced that this team is actually a serious contender at this point, Lepore.
It's so hard because it takes some sort of self-evaluating when looking at the Leafs because they're so over-covered and looking at these things. Like if someone asks us about another team with the Leafs record or a similar record, here we are being all negative, like, oh, like they're going to dry up in the playoffs and this penalty kill, there's no way they can turn this around. And with Marner out, we're completely fucked. If we lose that 1 star, we're done. Whereas we look at another team that we know less about and just be, they're still a good team. Who knows what'll happen? It's all good. Right. So I try to catch myself this time of year, but you seem a little concerned, Anthony Bruno. I'm not used to seeing you like this.
Yeah, again, it's just I factor in everything, right? I factor in what I'm watching, I factor in the numbers, and I'm just not very confident about this team right now. And again, their record over the last 24 games is really good. The only teams with a better record over the last 24 games are Florida and Carolina. And then the Leafs are 3rd. And Samsonov is playing well. That's a positive. But to get through Florida and Boston in the first 2 rounds with how this team is playing defensively, especially when you look at the defensive numbers of both Florida and Boston, it's just, man, it's an uphill battle. It is such an uphill battle. And I think really the only way the Leafs are going to get through is if Matthews, Marner, and Nylander go into God mode in the first round. Something we have not seen. We've seen one of them go into God mode in a series. We've seen maybe a couple of them have really good series at the same time. But have we ever seen Marner, Matthews, and Nylander all go into God mode in the same playoff series? Have we seen that yet? I don't think we have.
No, but I'm not going to say ask if that's asking too much, but I think we sweep any team if all 3 of them start clicking. So it's not really fair to say like every player. I should put it this way: it's easy to say, well, if we'll win if all of them go off, right?
Well, listen,
that's what it's going
like
to take to win.
I've seen McKinnon and Rantanen go off. And
that's 2 of them, though.
Makar. I've seen those guys go off together in series. I've seen the Edmonton guys go off together. But this Leafs team, and again, that's one of the reasons why they have not been able to win multiple playoff series. because all of their star players are not playing at that level at the same time.
Then why
it
we
really
even
does
talking?
boil down to that.
Then why are we even talking about the penalty kill and the defensive numbers? If it's just going to come down to if our big boys can outscore the other team's big boys.
Listen, I see where you're coming from. I think all of this stuff matters, but if you really want to be cut and dry with it all, what matters the most is the play of those guys. When you just look at the cap numbers, how much of the money is going to those guys, and again, it's similar with a lot of these other teams, but why do you think these other teams make deep playoff runs? It's because their highly paid guys produce. It's really as simple as that. Look at Tampa. Like when Tampa's made their runs, Kucherov, Point, Stamkos, and Hedman have all gone off.
But I'd like to actually dissect it and go series by series. If they all really did go off, or it was just it worked out great in the way that 2 would go off, then the other 2 would go off. This series 3 would go off. I don't know.
Well, think about it. Even when the Leafs beat Tampa last year, those Tampa guys did not have good series.
Last 2 years they haven't. Even when the year they beat us 5-on-5, the numbers weren't good.
Yeah. But last year specifically, I want to say Kucherov and Point had like 4 points each in the 6 games. I believe like they were the highest scoring guys on the team, and they both had like 4 points.
That's
surprising. I could be wrong. I'd have to go look at the stats. But, and again, I hate to just break it down to something that's so simple, but if those guys just decide, you know what, this is our series, that just changes like everything with this team. Then, as you said, the penalty kill doesn't matter. The goaltending to a certain extent doesn't matter. The defensive play to a certain degree doesn't matter. If those guys do what we've expected them to do all along. Anyway, you know what else I want to talk about, Lepore? We kind of touched on this, is the goaltending. Like, this is Samsonov's net now at this point, right? Like, it went from the beginning of the season, like, holy shit, he's the worst goalie in hockey, and I cannot believe he's this bad, to, oh my God, he's going to be the game 1 playoff starter at this point, barring, like, Joseph Woll absolutely taking it back in the last, 15, 20 games here, which honestly, I think is, when you look at the probability of that, I don't think it's very high at this point. I think it's Samsonov's net to lose.
Yeah. What an absolute fucking roller coaster of a season Samsonov's had. They sure had a book about this. Did you see the comments, Kuznetsov's comments after the game, or see that presser?
I saw that. Where he said that we're just too hard on players here in the Toronto media. I mean, that narrative's been going around for so long. I get it. Listen, if you're a good player, you're a good player. Maybe some guys are a little bit more affected by the heavy coverage, the day-to-day coverage that this team gets. But I think a lot of times, honestly, it's kind of an excuse. I know it's not the same coverage in some of these other American markets and some of these other, kind of, I don't want to say markets that don't really give a shit about hockey, but you know what I'm trying to say here, right? Like, I know it's different in some of those markets, but come on, man. We can't keep using that as an excuse.
Yeah. I did he paid a lot of compliments too, and it's his buddy saying, oh, this guy's going to reach the top. He's going to be at the top. It's funny, him saying, thank God he doesn't understand English too well. But I'm with you, though. My take's always been, yeah, that attention can suck. It can get to you after the game when you're laying in bed looking at the ceiling. Who knows what's going through the mind? But I've always kind of assumed that once the puck drops, the puck drops. And like you said, you're a good player and things will happen for you, or you're not and things will not happen for you. As far as Samsonov being the goalie, you said it, man. 15, 16 games to go. What is it? What could really happen in those games for us to do a 180 and go to Waller? I don't know. And people are really hoping's the wrong word. People are looking forward to seeing what he's going to be when he gets back. Because that injury wasn't insignificant. And is even to a point, maybe he's still not 100%. Martin Jones is the backup. That hasn't been brought up. And Martin Jones has played. So, well, do you think Martin Jones will play before now in the end of the season?
I think it's possible. Just because, whether one of these goalies needs a rest or something. Like, I think it's possible he gets into a game or two down the stretch, especially since this team is, like I said, they're pretty much locked into the 3 seed at this point.
Yeah. They're the only team, if you look at the standings, the East is actually pretty interesting this year, except for Toronto. They're just they're locked in pretty well to that third spot. You have Boston and Florida fighting it out. Then the other division at the top is good. The wild card's obviously the wild card. But yeah, sucks, man.
Yeah, no, it's a really good point. Every other division is still up for grabs when it comes to like all the seeding.
Mm.
Like even the Metropolitan, the Rangers and Hurricanes are going for first place. The 3 seed in the Metropolitan is far from decided at this point. Same with the wild card, the Central Division in the West. At the time of recording, Jets, Avalanche, Stars all tied with 91 points. The Pacific Division, like the Oilers still have these games in hand. Like they could potentially still win the division. It's becoming less and less likely as the games go along here. But there's a lot to be decided. Like the Golden Knights and Kings fighting for the 3 seed in the Pacific. It's really only the Leafs who at this point pretty much know, all right, we're locked into the 3 hole here. Are we going to Boston or are we going to Florida to start round 1 of the playoffs?
Mm.
So it puts the Leafs in an interesting spot where they could rest guys. They can try some things. I don't know if it's going to hurt or help this team that they're kind of the only team that's kind of coasting along right now, but that remains to be seen.
Fucking brutal, man. Like this format, like we talk about this every year. And from a fan's perspective, here we were with like a quarter of the season to go, and the Leafs just locked into that spot. It's brutal.
Yeah,
brutal.
No, it's not fun because going back to last season from like November, the Lightning and Leafs knew that they were playing each other in the first round.
It was over. So everyone else had, the Bruins were the Bruins and everyone else had a bad start. It was over, like just boring. And people talk about the rivalries they get built through this format and how you're playing divisional opponents all the time. I think it's the opposite from the viewing perspective. It sucks because you know who you're going to play. Like, do you remember being a kid? And again, how I would say, I'm going to say my age here, when it'd be the last game of the season and the games would all finish and they would show the seeding and show who's going to play who. And it was exciting because you didn't really know. You thought you were playing someone and then somebody lost. They shouldn't have lost. So then someone got leapfrogged and now you're playing this team. It was awesome. It was awesome. Like you found out that night where now, at least maybe it's not a slam dunk, but it's this team or that team.
Yeah, those days are long gone, man. And I get it. There are still some races that go down to the wire. And maybe as Leaf fans, we felt this way because things have kind of been decided for this team over the last number of years where they've either had a really good record, like the year that they won the Canadian division, they finished first in the Canadian division, the years that they've been locked against Tampa in the first round this season. There's been a lot of seasons recently where they kind of understand where they fall with a lot of runway left to go in the regular season. And there hasn't been much to play for down the stretch. And I do miss those days where it's like, fuck, everything comes down to the last game. Who's playing who? What are the matchups? We just don't get that nowadays, man.
Do you think it affects the team?
I think so.
Instead of any team, like any team in that situation.
Yeah, like I think, and listen, I know that there are guys like Matthews still trying to chase 70 goals, a potential Hart Trophy. I know that's kind of less and less likely at this point because he's just hasn't been that hot recently. So I know like he's still playing for something. Like Nylander's having a career year. He's trying to hit 100 points for the first time. I think he's playing for something. But I think the team as a whole, it's got to be tough, man. Because game in and game out, like what's your motivation towards the end of the season? Like tightening up the details of the game. I think there's maybe more on the line for like the coaching staff because they're trying to get this team ready to play. They're trying to refine the details of the game. But with the rest of the team, it's like, how the hell do you find that motivation to go out and compete for these last 15 games when you know that if you basically just tread water for the last 15 or so games that you're still finishing in the 3 seed?
Yeah. Hard. It must be, like you said, it must be hard for the coaches because they could see some guys kind of straying away and trying to keep the team focused. And how do you get these millionaires motivated, especially when they're locked into a spot?
Yeah, it's rough, man. Also, another thing I wanted to ask you, Lepore, is what are your thoughts on Connor Dewar and Joel Edmundson so far and how they've looked? And I know that they're not really moving the needle too much, but have you been impressed with either of those guys?
You know what you said, they're not really moving the needle. I'd be lying if I said, other than kind of catching their jersey numbers here and there, if I've even really noticed them. Wait, did Dewar had a breakaway
Yeah,
against
Dewar's quick.
yeah,
I will say that is the one thing that has kind of jumped off the screen about that guy. Like when you watch him, he's got some big boy speed, man. Like there was
yeah.
even a play where he just flew past Brent Burns in that Carolina game. So I think from a speed perspective, like that's been really cool to see from Dewar. But I mean, other than that, like Joel Edmundson is Joel Edmundson. He's just kind of there.
Yeah.
And he's big, and we all know he's 6'5", 230 pounds. But other than that, not a lot of positive stuff coming from Joel Edmundson.
Yeah. Why? I'm gonna be that Leaf fan now. Essentially, that deal or those two deals cost us Benoit, right? Through waivers. Are we better? You know what I mean? You see where I'm going with this? Like making those moves and then losing Benoit as a result because we had too many guys in our lineup.
Yeah, because
What
that's
was the plan
well,
there?
that's the issue now, right? Is that Benoit is just not getting into games here.
Yeah.
When he's at like, he looked good. Like he looked good as like a third pairing guy, and he was really motivated. Like you hear the story of how he came into training camp and he was telling the reporters, like, I'm gonna get a spot on this team. And he did. He earned a spot on the team. And I know there were some injuries along the way that affected that. But yeah, because now really like the decor is set. Like Edmundson isn't coming out of the lineup because of what they traded at the deadline. Liljegren is probably not coming out of the lineup because
No.
he's a right shot. Lyubushkin, again, they traded for Lyubushkin. He's not coming out of the lineup. So really, like these other guys now are just like insurance policies. Giordano, Benoit. I mean, even if you want to lump in Connor Timmins to that,
That's a
th-
fucking name I haven't heard in a while, man. Holy shit.
yeah.
Oof.
So at this point, it's kind of set. And, we could even get into the conversation like, is this decor good enough? I don't know, man. It's it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out. Because again, I'm just not that confident in what I'm seeing from this team. And who knows? Maybe they pull a rabbit out of their ass and they beat Florida in the first round. But I can't. I don't know. I just can't see this team going on a serious run this year. Whereas in past seasons, I've been a lot more optimistic about them.
Yeah, I got my wires crossed there. It was Lagesson we lost through
Yeah,
waivers.
Lagesson was the guy
Yeah.
who the Leafs lost through waivers. Who
Yeah.
and he was even like he was
Sure.
decent.
He hit people. He was big and he hit people. Very
Yeah.
Swedish last name. Why not? That's again, what are we better?
Yeah, I'm not sure.
This is a pretty negative podcast, eh, Bruno, without us trying to make it a negative
I know,
podcast.
holy shit, man. But when you look at the defensive numbers, man, there has not been any improvement at all. And maybe I'd have to look at like some real deep, like advanced numbers. I'd have to pull up like some like sport logic stuff. But like, man,
Fancy.
they have looked the same, if not worse, when you look at like penalty kill, 5-on-5 defensive numbers. Like it just really hasn't improved. And I know it hasn't been that long since the trade deadline, but it's not like we're going to see any vast improvements here down the home stretch of the season, in my opinion.
So negative. So negative in Leafland after a
Oh
one
man,
loss.
is there anything else that's like interesting you just in terms of like playoff races going on right now? Anything across either the Eastern Conference or the Western Conference?
Just the Central, man. The Central is going to be a blast. Those last 15 games. We were just talking about how, teams can be in a position where they don't have really anything to play for. They have a lot to play for in that division. And we talked about, I think it was last week, about how bad you'd want to avoid the other two teams in the first round just to make your life easier. But that's the big one to me. And the thing is, too, right? They're three really good teams, and you have Nashville being Nashville right now. So I said on our previous show that I'm really bullish on the Jets. I think they may win the conference. So I'm kind of seeing what they can show me these last games too, if they can close this division out. I'm really focused on that.
Yeah, I think that's the most exciting race at this point is the Central Division because again, at the time of recording, they are all tied with 91 points. They haven't all played the same amount of games, but looking at the betting odds on Pinnacle, the Avalanche are the favorites to win the division, plus 135. The Jets at plus 169 are second, and then Dallas is at plus 240. That's a really tight division. Even looking at the favorites to win the conference, while the Oilers, they're still the favorite to win the Western Conference and get to the Cup final. Colorado second, Dallas third, Canucks fourth, Golden Knights fifth, and then the Jets are down with the sixth best odds, but they're still pretty short at plus 675. So there's really not a ton separating those top teams. And then there's a big drop off when it gets to like the Kings and the Predators and go down the list. But really, I could see any of those 6 teams outside of, again, I'm not very bullish on Vancouver. The Golden Knights have not been playing well, but when they're healthy, they're going to be a force. Again, my money's still on Edmonton at this point. I'm still on the Oilers to get out of the Western Conference.
Yeah, but you're wrong, Bruno. It's not going to happen.
I know the guy who has called Edmonton frauds and has chirped them the last number of years. I'm now on the bandwagon. At this very moment, I'm still riding with the Edmonton Oilers to win the Western Conference.
Gonna be fun to see how Anthony Bruno looks in a few months with these predictions.
Yeah, and a lot of my predictions don't end up well, but there are some that end up looking very good down the road. So yeah, you can make fun of me all you want, but that's where my opinion sits at this moment. Before we wrap up, just looking at the Eastern Conference, Florida still the favorites to win the East. They are also the Stanley Cup favorites right now on Pinnacle. Just looking at the Eastern Conference, though, you got Florida first, Hurricanes second, Bruins third, Rangers fourth, and then the Leafs are fifth. So those are the 5 teams that are kind of clustered together. Then there's a pretty big drop off down to like Tampa and the Islanders and so on and so forth. So looking at the betting market right now, again, one of Florida, Carolina, Boston, Rangers, or Leafs is probably going to win the East. So the Leafs are still in the mix. They're still in the mix, but again, I think they're like the least serious of those teams to actually
really feel that way. Like, say if you're making power rankings right now.
Yeah, I think I actually do feel that way, man. Could they get hot? Absolutely, but I still think Florida is the best team in the conference. Even though the Bruins are not very good, just on paper, for whatever reason, they just continue to win games and get great goaltending.
They're our boogeyman.
And then you have Carolina and the Rangers. Maybe they're kind of,
yeah.
You know, if you think about it, I think it's really Florida, Lepore, and then it's like kind of those next 4
Me too.
teams.
Yeah,
that's the way that I see it. So really, you know, let's say it's Leafs Boston in the first round, and then it's Leafs Florida round 2. Like that could be it. The winner of that series probably gets to the Cup final. So again, I just spent this whole podcast saying the Leafs aren't a serious contender, but holy shit, if they take out the Eastern Conference favorites in the second round, then they're probably getting to the Cup final, you would think.
If we're in the third round for the first time in a million years, we're feeling pretty good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But we know how it goes here in Leafland. Is there anything else you want to get off your chest before we wrap up this podcast?
Really quickly, Bruno, we touched on our experience at Descendant during last week's show, Descendant Pizza in Leslieville, Toronto, and paid it a lot of compliments. We both thought it was really good. But people were dumping on me. They were pissed off because I didn't give an actual score. So here I am. I'll give it a score. And I watched the Portnoy Barstool Pizza reviews, and he gave it an 8-1. Okay. He gave Descendant Pizza an 8-1. I think even their cheese pizza is called the 8-1 on the menu. I am here to say that 8-1 grading is absolutely blasphemous. Far too low. And I'm going to bump it all the way up a full mark. I'm going to give Descendant Pizza, Leslieville, Toronto, a 9-1. That's my score for Descendant Pizza.
That's a pretty awesome rating. Jeez, I know you like the pizza, but a 9.1.
This is how I see it. If I'm going to put a pizza in the 9s, it pretty well has to be as good as it gets for that style. And that's how I see that pizza. Like, I don't think it would be possible to make a pizza that's objectively better, and it fits food, so it's never completely objectively better, but people know what I mean by that. I thought it was excellent. So props to Descendant. 9-1, man. 9-1 all the way.
Yeah, wow. That's pretty impressive coming from you, man, because you were like, listen, I love food, you love food, but you were like the food snob, just like you're a Jersey snob.
Well, I'm a lot of different kinds of snob, Bruno. People know that. Those true. Who know me well know that.
And listen, my experience with Detroit style pizza. Like, I just don't have that much to base it on, honestly. Like, I haven't eaten a lot of Detroit style pizza in my life. I thought it was really good. Like, I think where Portnoy rated it is probably about right. Like in the low 8s. That's what I would give it. But man, a 9-1. Holy cow. They should be giving us a call at this point. With the amount of airtime we've given them on this podcast. Descendant Pizza, if you're listening, send us an email.
Or if someone listening knows whoever at Descendant Pizza, fire this pod their way.
Yeah, for real, man. But yeah, I think that's going to do it, Lepore, for episode 137 of the GFP podcast. Not a lot of positivity coming from this podcast.
And it wasn't even planned. Like, usually we're all revved up to shit on our favorite hockey team and it's like a focus. This just kind of came organically, and that's not a good sign.
No, it was pretty gloomy. Like, I just, I mean, Jesus, as the podcast went along, I just felt like there was like a dark cloud over in my little studio here. Like, it was just, I mean, there wasn't any rain, but holy shit. I mean, the vibe's just not very good right now.
But I'm going to admit my sports fandom, and I'm sure, Bruno, you would agree with this. Here we are, super doom and gloom. Like we said, it was a very negative show. If the David Kampf penalty does not get called and the Leafs hold on, we just got to win against Carolina and look really good.
This is probably a different podcast.
100% different plan. That's the idiocy of being a sports fan. And that's why the players avoid social media and, put their headphones on and ignore the world, because things like that.
Yeah. And that's how fine the lines are too. Right. And especially in the playoffs. Like, it really is as simple as that. I remember even back to that Florida-Boston series in the first round. Like, Marchand had a breakaway to end it. I believe it was in Game 5, stoned by Bobrovsky. And the next thing you know, Florida's winning the series.
I think he hit the post. Maybe I'm remembering it
wrong.
He
may have hit either he hit the post or Bobrovsky had a big save. But that was a moment Boston could have just taken the series, and next thing you know, the Panthers are going on this crazy run. But just looking at the Leafs' upcoming schedule, it's not difficult. Like, okay, the next 2 games are both winnable. Philly, Washington. Then they play Edmonton, Carolina, New Jersey. New Jersey's not having a great season, but I still view them as a dangerous team, honestly, just based on their roster on paper. But
they're checked out, though, man. I love watching Jersey. They're checked out.
Yeah, they're not making the playoffs. And then you go down further, Washington, Buffalo. So, like, 4 of the next 6 games are pretty winnable. Then they got Florida and Tampa coming up after that. They play Florida and Tampa twice more. So they play the Panthers twice and the Lightning twice to end out the season.
I assume it's like a Florida swing, and then both teams will be in Toronto.
Yeah, that is exactly what's happening. So the Leafs are ending the season on that Florida swing. They close out the year at Florida and then at Tampa. So should be a great finish of the season.
And are we in a situation where the Leafs are just staying in Florida to play their opponent?
Oh, man. Very possible. Very possible. But I mean, that's going to do it for episode 137. We'll maybe try to bring a little bit more positivity.
Sunshine.
On episode 138. Because holy cow, that was
the pizza was good.
Episode.
Yeah, we talked highly about a certain pizza, but that's about it.
Yeah, that was the highlight of the episode. Positive vibes coming from Descendant Pizza, but other than that, dark and gloomy days in Leafland, despite them having the 3rd best record in the NHL since January 18th. That's how us Leaf fans operate. But that's it. Listen, if you're listening to us for the first time and you really enjoyed the show, it would be amazing if you give us a 5-star rating and review on either Apple or Spotify. And if you're watching us on YouTube, you have no idea how much this helps. It's so, like, it takes 5 seconds, but please do this because it helps us immensely. Liking the video, subscribing to the channel, leaving a comment down below. And then while you're at it, ring that post notification bell so you know exactly when the GFP podcast is dropping some new content. So for Michael Lepore, I'm Anthony Bruno. Hopefully the next episode will be a little bit more positive. We'll have some more great Leaf things to talk about. But until then, enjoy the hockey, and we will talk to you very, very soon.
Thanks, everyone.